The first 8 minutes of Men in Black are probably the best example of world building I've ever seen. Throughout those first 8 minutes, we understand everything we need to know about the story that we're about to jump into. We realize that there are aliens, that aliens live amongst us, that there is a secret organization that is responsible for keeping the peace between humans and aliens. Not only that, they're able to erase people's memories specifically about the aliens so that we can live life normally. World building, that's what those first 8 minutes does, is this process by which we introduce to our audience the rules and customs of the world that we're about to live in. It's usually associated with sci-fi or fantasy genres, but every story has world building. If you're telling a story about a law office, that whole place has its own rules and customs. If you're telling a story about a high schools have, even if it's, in your town in the present day, it still has its own world and its own rules and its own customs. So that's what I want to talk about today. Good, effective world building, why we need it and how to do it, and also how it links to structure sometimes. The first thing about world building is that you must really research or at least take the time to create your world and be really consistent. Once you establish your own rules in your world, be consistent. Don't break the rules that you have made up yourself. So that's a really important thing about world building. Another thing is instead of using exposition to build your world, maybe a little title card in the beginning is completely acceptable, like in the Hunger Games or Star Wars, but exposition through conflict and action. In Men in Black, the first 10 minutes of the movie are a sequence in which we see the Tommy Lee Jones character find an alien in the back of a truck, and then there's like a little conflict there, and then he erases someone's memory. So show, don't tell. And not only that, show through conflict, show through action, show through events happening, and not just someone explaining to us what those rules are. Let's see those rules in action. Also, always remember that the story is the most important thing. The world should service the story that you're telling. If it doesn't service the story that you're telling, adjust the world and adjust the rules of this world and not the other way around. We connect ourselves to our character and our character's journeys way more than the backdrop, although we love the backdrop, right? In The Last of Us, there is really good backdrop and world building and rules. But what we care about is those two characters reaching safety. That's what we care about. So everything else has to service the story that we're emotionally connected to. So in world building, there's kind of two different ways to approach it. And I'm going to talk to one by one and how that affects your structure. You have stories in which everyone has always been living those rules. There's not a newcomer into that world. So it's your Game of Thrones, for example. That is the reality of all of those characters. So from the beginning of your story, you are doing your world building, right? From the beginning of Act 1. Act 1 is not only introducing your story, it's introducing us to the world. So that's a story in which everyone is part of that world. You have this other kind of story that is really common, which is the outsider that joins a new world and must quickly adapt to the rules of that world. So what usually happens is that we meet a character in Act 1 in his ordinary world. And by the time that Act 2 starts, then we have this newcomer acting as a surrogate for the audience. Another very common way to do world building is by having a character that is new to this world and must learn the rules of this world with the audience. We call those surrogate characters. That character is a surrogate for the audience because just as us, we don't know the rules of this world. So that means that usually, for example, Dorothy, we spend the first act in an ordinary, mundane world. And by the beginning of the second act, we're introduced to a new world. And with our character, we have to learn the rules of that world. So structurally, that makes a difference. In Men in Black, it's both really because we have the Will Smith character who is being introduced to this world. But even before we get to meet the Will Smith character, we get this 8-10 minute sequence in which all these rules are laid out for us. And then when we meet the Will Smith character, we're starting to go a lot deeper into the minutia, into the details of this world, with already the foundation of how it works. So we're still discovering a lot of stuff through action, conflict, comedy, right? But it's done in a very, very intelligent way. In a film like The Hunger Games, for example, we get a very basic explanation up top about what the Hunger Games are. And then throughout the first act of the movie, that Katniss, our protagonist, she knows what the Hunger Games are. She knows the world, but we get real specific about the rules of the world where she lives, about the district, about hunting, about the day-to-day like lives of these people, about how many times your name is in the draw for being a tribute in the Hunger Games. So we're with her from the beginning, but we still have to learn more and more. And then not only that, we once she's in, she gets selected for the Hunger Games, then she becomes our surrogate because then she's going to know everything, the behind the scenes and like everything that she never had access to from the inside. So it's also kind of doing both. So structurally, that's usually what happens. You have a first act where you either show the ordinary world or the foundations of that world or the basic rules. And then as we start in act two, we go really deep into the specifics of the world. So the big takeaways today are action to show world building. Think about your structure. Is this an act one world building? Is this an act two? Do you have a newcomer to this world? Is there someone that's being introduced to this world? Is your world specific versus generic? We don't like generic on this channel. We like specific stuff. Be specific. Trust your specificity. Are you being consistent? And is your story more important? Is your world serving your story and not the other way around? Hopefully that was helpful. Please subscribe to the channel. Check out the other videos we have and we'll continue to have. And thank you so much for watching.